Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, as always on Monday, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank out of Singapore. Vishnu, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. No better way to start the Monday, though we're halfway through it rather than starting, but oh well.
Now, before we get your insights, Vishnu, I want to take a look at crypto markets. Bitcoin is at 19,219. It's up 0.52%. Ethereum is at 1,305.02. It's up 1.58%. We look across the regional equity markets, and the Straits Times Index, where you are at in Singapore, is down 1.16%. Bursa Malaysia is down 0.12%. Shanghai is down 0.15%. The ASX All Ordinaries is down 1.39%. The Nikkei is down 1.41%. The Hang Seng is down 1.25%. But bucking the trend is the Kospi, which is up marginally 0.03%. Vishnu, what's your view on market performance in the first half of the day?
It does look like there's a lot more caution that continues to be in the markets, despite some of the relief rallies we saw last week. The U.S. session ended in a pretty red note. So even as I think some consolation was taken from the UK, rolling back the unfunded tax cuts, so on and so forth, I think markets really focused on much higher inflation expectations in the US that was embedded in the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiments Survey. And I think that was then extrapolated to a more aggressive Fed. Markets are now pricing in that the Fed fund rates could go up as high as 5%. So they're looking at peak rates at or slightly above 5%. This has in turn knocked on confidence. And this is why you saw US markets selling off on Friday and without a very clear reason to inflect the other way. I think markets today are trading pretty cautiously. To some extent, I think markets could also be somewhat digesting the National Congress meetings in China in terms of their policy shifts, what that could mean for the rest of Asia.
Now, Vishnu, I want to zoom in on that because the 20th annual Communist Party meeting is a crucial one, but it seems to be so far long on rhetoric, short on details. When are the details coming in?
Absolutely, Brian. I mean, you're right. This is held once every half a decade. Usually, it's you'll see some kind of transitioning in leadership involved with the details. This time around, President Xi is going for an unprecedented, no pun intended, third term. And right here, I think one of the things that comes across is even though you said long on rhetoric on a technicality, this was a slightly shorter speech, under 2 hours compared to the last marathon of over 3.5 hours. So by their standards, they've kept it concise. But you're right, the details are sorely lacking. So you've got a lot of slogan type information, which is to say, talking about common prosperity still being important, some pretty firm rhetoric on Taiwan, their views on it. I think for a lot of economy watchers, they were very much more relieved to hear that economic and development priorities remained in the picture, albeit subject to some caveats such as going for quality growth. And there are a lot of things to be read between the lines. The details, however, and that's also not at a very high level of granularity, but some of the details may only be expected to come up in drips and drabs, and most of it would be after March because that's when the Politburo and the Standing Committee would all meet and they would come up with more concrete economic policies. But our suspicion is that we need to watch how this evolves. And one particular one where there's no clarity on, which has left markets somewhat divided and scratching their heads, is the COVID policy. While they didn't double down on it, President Xi alluded to the fact that it has worked so far, and that has helped them manage to keep the death rates down. So I think markets are still divided about it. The consensus, the broad consensus, if we might use that word, is that it's only going to be very, very gradually lifted. They're probably looking at end of Q1 next year, or even later than that. So that's where we have arrived at with some of the very, and in the broader sense, the broad brush views out of this Congress.
Now, Vishnu, looking ahead to the rest of the world and looking ahead for the rest of this week, what should we be looking out for in terms of data points and events that could move markets?
That's really something that I think we need to keep our eyes on. In terms of looking within the region for some of the data points, for those so inclined, you can watch the Bank Indonesia's meeting to see how they're going to try to keep pace with the Fed, especially with the more entrenched hawkish Fed views, whether they're going to surprise with the 50 basis points or come in with the 25. Markets are fairly split on that now. Australian employment data will be out. That may also give us a bit of a cue into how the RBA may dial back on its pace of hikes. But one way or another, it suggests a pretty strong dollar environment. And another reason why we need to be aware of the strong dollar environment, there are many opposing forces. One of it is renminbi is likely to be stable in this very critical week of meetings, the National Party Congress. So that's one. So for those reasons, dollar may not swing too much one way or another, but you want to keep your eyes on the dollar, mainly because there are some risk factors out there. One of the other things to watch out for is come end of the week, they will be announcing any changes, if there are, to the Politburo Standing Committee. So people will get a glimpse of whether Premier Li Keqiang is left in his place or not. One way or another, he's not going to be Premier. He's finished his 2 terms, but whether he'll be in the committee. And I think there's a lot of tea leaf reading around this, but the main takeaway here is that this week is perhaps going to be driven more by headlines than scheduled data. So headlines on the UK, any more evolving news on what are the tax cuts kept in place, what are the spending cuts that Liz Truss has suggested, when this will have an impact on sterling and euro and a cascade down on the dollar. Headlines on China, whether there's any other statement made about COVID or anything else. So these things are the unexpected headlines that we want to just keep a lookout for. So this week is really about sitting back and glancing across broadly.
Now, Vishnu, as always, thank you very much for your insights and thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure always, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy from Mizuho Bank on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch, powered by the Smart Investor out of Singapore. I'm Brian Fernandez. This video and podcast will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks a lot for tuning in.